Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to make a fall card, but just like with any of my card making tutorials, you can switch it up with the stamps that you have and make it for whatever occasion you want. Now, I'm a real big believer that when you begin stamping, you should invest in your basics, things that you can use over and over again all year round. I really think everyone should have a good set of leaves. This leaf set is one of the unmounted sets from our sponsor, Rubber Stamp Tapestry. You can find it online at pegstamps.com and it's about $12, so you're going to have a lot of versatility with one fairly inexpensive set. Now we're going to do a few techniques today. We're going to use inks and cardstock. I have got a piece of cardstock that I cut down to 7 inches by 10 inches and folded in half for my card base. I decided to use cream for that because it's a nice warm color for fall. And then I took a white piece of cardstock and I cut this piece to 4.5 by 6.5, so it will be a nice layering layer. And we're going to be doing some direct to ink techniques and some other fun things here too. And then I just took the leftover piece and I'm going to do some stamping on this because it's a little easier for me to keep my paper large if I'm going to cut it out with my die cutting machine, which is what I'm going to do, but you can stamp it, you can cut it out by hand rather if you prefer. So I'm going to do some stamping here, and I put 3 of the larger leaves that are kind of autumnal, and like there's a pretty nice big ginkgo leaf there, but that doesn't really feel autumnal to me. So I grabbed a couple leaves that look like the leaves we have in New England, and I'm going to stamp them a few times here. So I'm going to start off, and I'm using VersaFine Clair because, and you use whatever ink you have, but I like this because it dries waterproof and doesn't smear and gives me a really nice impression. I'm starting off with a yellow, then I'm going to do a little bit with some orange here. And you go light to dark, that way you don't end up cross-contaminating your ink pads, because yellow is an ingredient in orange, you know what I mean? And I'm going to use red last because that's my darkest, and I'm just going to go kind of on top of the orange there a little bit. Maybe get the stem too. Alright, so we have a triple inked stamp here, and then I'm going to stamp it on my mat. And the thing about the stamping mat I'm working on, this is just a piece of thick foam. You can use fun foam from the craft store. This is a Carabelle Studio stamping mat. A mouse pad will work, an old phone book, anything that will give you just a little bit of a soft, instead of like a hard table, you want something soft, because as you can see, I don't have any cushion on my stamp. I find if my stamp is good quality, I can just paint some aliens, tack it over and over, glue on the back, let it dry, and then stick them to my blocks and they work fine. It saves money and it saves some space in my storage binder. So I've got a really nice impression there. Now, of course, if you don't want your leaf so bright, you could tap a little brown over the whole thing and that would look really nice. So I'm going to do a couple colors for this leaf here. I'm going to do this kind of lighter green all over. I like this ink. I've been using it a bit over the past couple of months. It's a little bit sticky. I guess it will stay wet enough for embossing, but I haven't used it for heat embossing yet. But I like it because it gives me a really good impression, just like the regular VersaFine and VersaColor did. So I did 2 shades of green here. I'm gonna stamp that there. I'm going to cut this out either with scissors or a die cut machine. So, oh, beautiful detail there. And I'm going to do this one here as well, and I think I will do, I'll start with a yellow, then I'll do my greens on that one. So I try to repeat the colors throughout my design as much as I can, just because it gives it a little bit of harmony. So think about that when you are making your cards. How would this, you know, sometimes you look at a card and it's pretty, but there's something just seems a little off about it. And it's often just that that there's no, it's discordant somewhere. There's a color that doesn't quite go, or maybe there's 4 different greens used, when if you just used, you know, the same green over and over again, you'd get a better result. All right, I'm going to set this aside to dry. You can see I got some really beautiful detail there. And I'm using a nice smooth cardstock. It doesn't have to be expensive, but you do want something that's smooth. Now I'm just going to grab my scrap of paper and my other white piece of cardstock. Now the other thing I want to mention, we're going to do an inky technique. Our hands are going to get dirty. So after you do an inky technique, like we're going to do here, go wash your hands before you come back to make your card. Otherwise you're going to have a mess. So I grabbed some regular Distress ink. I know I use the oxides, and you certainly can use the oxides for this, but I haven't used my regular Distress ink in a long time. So I thought I would just grab that. And I'm doing a little direct to paper inking. You could apply this with a sponge, but your color will be a little bit lighter. It doesn't have to be perfect. the cubes are great. In fact, I would recommend the cubes over the full-size pads in most cases, just because they're so convenient, they're cheaper, you can still re-ink them with the same inks, and they're, you know, so much easier to store. All right, I am breaking my rule here and going over with some yellow, but it'll be fine. And I do want to do a little bit of red. I might do the red with a sponge though, so I don't get too much. Got my little dauber here, and I'm just gonna pounce some ink on with a sponge. I don't get too fancy with my backgrounds. I don't worry if they're not absolutely perfect, because we're going to be doing so much to this card that it won't matter. It really won't matter a bit. If you wanted to do some stenciling on here, you could, but I got to tell you, you're going to lose a lot of that detail, so I really probably wouldn't bother with it. Okay, so now we've just got pretty much all over design on our cardstock. Now the reason I do this on a separate layer and not work right on my card is because sometimes you can see the ink through the back. It's not too bad now, but I think when I wet it you'll be able to see through it, and also there's no way I'll be able to keep the back of my card clean if I did it right on my card base. So if you're neater than I am, you might be able to get away with it. I can't, and I think once I get the water speckles on there, it's going to show through. So I like to use one of these kind of like garden, well, this is a glass cleaner bottle. It's I bought it empty and clean, but you can squeeze slowly and get big droplets, and that's what I like about this rather than a fine mist. So you can also dip a paintbrush in water and you can like flick it on there too. And I'm just going to blot that up and let it dry. You can speed it along with a heat tool. If you're going to use a heat tool, my recommendation is to dry both sides. Here you can see how the ink seeped through once I wet it, so that's why it just would be difficult to do that as a one-layer card. Now, something I like to do before I begin, if I'm going to use any pattern paper or any particular embellishments, I will pull all that stuff out first to make sure that what I have to use for embellishments is going to match what I use for inking, because it's easier to find embellishments and papers and things like that first, and then ink to match versus the other way around, making a beautiful background, then trying to find things that go with it. Okay, it's nice and dry. We're going to set this. We're going to set this down on our spongy mat again, because we're going to do some stamping on this, and we're actually going to do some resist. So generally, when you're doing a resist, you're working on like a white paper, and you're stamping and making a resist so that the white shows through. We're actually going to make our resist so that this color shows through, and the rest of our paper we're going to be blacking out. It's really, really cool. Okay, so what I want to do is figure out how I'm going to arrange my stamps. So I am going to place my stamps, and I'm going to take advantage of all the stamps in this set, and I'm going to place them face down on my paper. So make sure they're clean. You don't want to put them down dirty, or you're going to end up with some residue. And I'm doing kind of big ones around the edges because I'm imagining that I'm going to be decorating the center part with probably like a die cut label. So I kind of want these bigger, bolder images towards the outside. So I just try to space things out. You're going for kind of an abstract design. When you're doing this, you're actually working on your design skills, because you can't really see the way the stamps are going to come out. So you're really relying on how good the design is. And this is a great way to use a stamp set when you have something like leaves or flowers or dots or shapes, something that's a little bit more abstract. So I'm a really big fan of investing in kind of more abstract images for that reason. Now I think I'm going to turn this around here so I have a little bit more negative space to fit some other stuff. Put this little vine in here. We're going to make really good use of this set today. You could do the same thing if you had clear stamps. Ooh, and if they want to stick to your fingers, if you just dip your fingers in a bucket, like a little thing of water, it will keep them from sticking to your fingers, but hopefully still give them enough oomph to stick to the stamp block. So there I can see that it's nice and well balanced. So I'm going to grab this really big stamp mount. This is a Fisker's, I think it's called a stamp press. It's really easy to use. If you had like a MISTI tool or a stamp positioner, one of those tools, you could definitely do that easily with one of those tools. I'm actually going to turn it this way because I do want to stamp on that mat, and it's not going to fit if I go the other way. There we go. So I'm going to line this up and just press straight down so that I end up sticking all of those, sorry about the glare, sticking all of those stamps down to my stamping block. Okay, so see that? They're all right there. So now what I'm going to do is ink this up with some sticky ink, and I'm going to use Versamark. You can use whatever you have. You could actually take a makeup sponge with glycerin. That would work really well. You want to ink that up really good and make sure that all of those stamps are nice and shiny. And the benefit to this Versamark ink or glycerin is that you don't need to wash these stamps afterwards. Actually, embossing ink is made from glycerin, and what that does is conditions the stamps and makes them nice and soft and supple so they won't dry out, especially if you don't use your stamps that often, or maybe you have so many like me that you don't use them that often, you know, the same set that often. It just kind of gives them a little protection, which is a good thing. Okay, and I'm going to grab my little embossing pouch. All this is a little pouch that I sewed, and I put some baby powder or cornstarch in it, and it kind of wicks away any moisture. Like if I go like this, it's gonna wick away any moisture, and it's also going to take away any static that's on my paper, so the embossing powder isn't going to stick there. Okay, now I am just going to... And the great thing about the stamp press is that I can set it down and I can eyeball it, make sure it's lined up really well before I press it down onto my paper. Now if you're using a MISTI or something, then you would have already, you know, your paper will be magneted down and you know that you're going to get it in the right spot. I really think this works great, and it's like a fraction of the price. I think these are around, I don't know, 10 or 15 bucks. Depending on the size you want. And I'm giving it really good pressure because I got to make sure that that embossing ink transfers. I think Tim Holtz calls it being a CPR stamper. Giving CPR to this poor thing. Okay, so now I'm just going to grab that scratch paper that I used a second ago, and I'm going to fold it in half first, and I'm going to set this on there, and I'm going to sprinkle on this really thick embossing powder called Amazing Glaze. Now this is bigger crystals of embossing powder, so it's going to give me a really nice thick glaze for a resist. The drawback with using this type of powder though is that because the crystals are so thick, it's not going to capture as much detail. So I'm just going to get kind of a rough leafy shape here. I'm not going to get a ton of detail, but that's fine because this is just a background. All right, it looks like it did a really good job. If you do have any stray powder anywhere, you can just brush it with a dry paintbrush. Usually just flicking on the back does the trick. But if you had like a little bit of your paper that was still damp, it would grab that powder, and that's where you'd end up with a little bit of trouble. But even so, it would just give you a little bit of a distressed look, so it's not the end of the world. So now I'm going to heat up my heat tool and emboss this. Okay, I put my embossing powder back in the jar, and this is the embossed piece, and you can kind of see where there was drops of water. It warped the paper, and where I stamped it, there were left like a little ring, so I think that's kind of a cool effect. We'll see how it looks when we ink it up. So we're going to use a VersaFine Clear, and the reason I'm using this versus other ink is because it's waterproof, so it won't transfer onto hands, wet fingerprints, or anything like that in the future. So, but you could use your Distress inks on top, you know, if you had a wet fingertip and you touched it, it would, you know, still reactivate, so that's why I like to use this. You could, of course, use like a product to seal it afterwards if you were using Distress ink, because I'm a big believer in using what you have. And what I'm going to do is just start working over my paper with different inks. So I've got this Chianti ink, which is kind of like, it looks kind of like a red wine, almost like a Bordeaux. It's just such a deep kind of purple red. Now, of course, these inks are transparent, so that means whatever is underneath, the ink we used underneath is going to show through the ink that we're applying, but wherever we have our embossing, we're just going to see that pure ink from underneath. So you do want something dark so that you can get that nice contrast. I just think this resist techniques are so fun because you get such a pretty effect. I like the way that little droplet in the center of that leaf looks. Now, if you didn't have a set of stamps like this, you could use one big background stamp. That would be totally beautiful. This just gives you that background stamp look with a set of stamps. So I think the more ways you can figure out to use what you already have, the more versatile your collection will be, and it'll keep you from buying things, like just duplicating things. And if you buy something that's like you know, leaves, flowers, they're not going to go out of style. So if you have limited stamping dollars, you know that, you know, it's not like leaves change their shape or their colors over time. No, leaves are leaves. They are the same leaves on trees for the last 1,000 years. So, you know, you're not buying something that's going to be outdated, you know, like fast fashion in a year or so. Ooh, these colors are so rich. Part of me kind of wants to do a review on the VersaFine clear inks, but then another part of me thinks, well, I've not tried all the inks in the world. Like, I feel like I can do really good watercolor reviews because I feel like I've tried every watercolor out there practically. But with inks, there's just so many, and it's such a personal preference thing that it's hard for me to say, yeah, I can review those. It's like, well, I don't know. I don't know if I've used enough to review. So I'm just going to let that ink sit for a second and grab a tissue. Letting the ink sit for 30 seconds, a minute or so, that's going to help them seep into the fibers of the paper. And look what happens when you buff. All that ink comes off of the resist area. It doesn't come off of the paper because it's waterproof. And you just are left with this radiant, gorgeous background. Now, because we did a really inky technique, we're going to have some warping to our paper, but we'll just use extra adhesive to compensate for that. Make sure this is fully dry, go wash your hands, and then come on back and we are going to make the card. All right, the ink has had a chance to dry. It almost has like a leathery appearance. It's really pretty because you have all these layers of translucent ink that just look so nice together. So what I'm going to do is put quite a bit of adhesive on the back, because anytime we have those rough, warpy, inky, or embossed, like pressure embossed textured papers, we need more adhesive because we need to make sure that we're making really good contact with the substrate. And to give it a little extra oomph, I actually made took 2 layers of cardstock, a yellow and a purple, and adhered them together so I could stick this on there and have a really nice solid base to go on my card. I'm just going to go over this with my tissue again just to make sure that it's dry to press it down, because I did use a lot of ink on there. And then I found these brads. I thought they'd be really pretty to go in the corners. They're just these little, they're eyelets actually, just little maple leaf eyelets. And I'm going to use my Crocodile eyelet setter. Remember back in the day when you had to use like a hammer to set these things and you couldn't scrapbook or make cards after your family had gone to bed because you'd wake them up when you're banging your eyelets in? This thing is like the best paper crafting invention ever, I think. It doesn't really matter how you put your eyelets in. These leaves can, you know, go in any direction. They can just kind of tumble around in there. I think that's really pretty. And we're just going to use the eyelet setter to close them. Do that for each one of them. Now I want to put some ribbon down just to get a new texture, and I'm just going to make a straight line with my ATG. It doesn't want to stick too well. You could use hot glue for this. Try to avoid any glue that has like a that's really liquid and seepy. Like hot glue would be fine, or really thick glue I think would also be fine. And I'm just going to set that down like that. And then for this trim, I'm just going to lay it on top and attach it on the back. So just kind of this little velvet leaf trim is so pretty. I've had it for a long time. You can use whatever you want. You could take yarn, like you could do ribbon and then do like a strip of yarn on top. That would be really pretty. Alright, we're going to flip it over and we're going to attach everything to the back. Just try to keep everything nice and lined up. Do another strip for the ribbon, and also put plenty of adhesive down there so we'll be able to attach this right to our card base, because the rest of the decorating we can do while it's attached to our card. Actually, it doesn't even matter if that twists around a little bit on the back side because we're not going to see that. We just got to make sure it's going to be tacked in place. And then I'll even go over everything with adhesive just to kind of trap it down a little bit. There we go. And if you have any little tails of adhesive, just fold it over. If you need to adjust things on the front, you can do that before you stick it onto the card, because once you got it on the card, it's going to be pretty well taken care of, pretty well stuck. Try try to center it up, because once you press this down, you're not going to want to peel it up, because peeling it up to readjust it is going to make it look worse, so you're kind of stuck with how it looks. I just grabbed the purple sponge that I had used for making my background, because I knew I had plenty of ink left on it, and I'm just going to ink the edges of this label that I die cut earlier. And I found this sticky label here in my stash. I thought that would be really pretty to have a thanks so much card. And I'm going to grab the leaves that I cut out. Makes no difference whether you do it by hand or you use a machine. I like to use my scanning cut because I'm not so hot at cutting out things by hand. And I thought this would be really that would look really nice. Just arrange it however you want. I think that looks really pretty, or you could try clustering the elements together. It's up to you. I cut it with a 0.4 border just so that it would stand out a little bit from the background. I think I want to ink this up a little bit more because I think it's kind of too bright against the background. I think actually I'm gonna just take a couple of these leaves and stamp on that tag with a couple shades of greenish, like yellowy green and green. I think that would look really nice, and it would kind of reinforce the what we've been doing so far, and it will give us a nice texture. So I've got that Golden Meadow and Shady Lane inks. Ink it up first in my meadow. I'm going to do the big one first, because just like peg stamp, the little peg stamps, when you're using bigger stamps, you want to do your bigger images first and then fill in with your smaller ones. And maybe do this one just in the lighter green. That would be pretty. Oops, going off camera, sorry about that. I don't know how much of this we'll end up seeing, but we might as well cover it. And I also got this guy here. We can put him in a couple times. Overlapping. Oh, that's pretty. Well, they layer really well. I really haven't used this stamp set that much, and it's a shame because it's gorgeous. Oh, that's pretty. And then the middle part won't be seen anyway. All right, I really like that. Sometimes all you need is just to reinforce the element again if you have something that's looking a little dull, and that will be all it needs. So I did go ahead and turn on my hot glue gun because I had a feeling that I would need it for something. Oh no, I didn't. Hold on, my hot glue gun's not on. Okay, forget the hot glue gun. I got my tried and true trusty old foam squares. We will use those because they're the endless supply. I will never run out of foam squares as long as I live. Okay, we'll stick that down. Oh, it's like I hate to cover up. And that's how you know you have a good background, when you like can't bear to cover anything up on it because it's all so pretty. Did I put that on side? I don't think I put that on very straight. Sometimes you can readjust your foam square panel, and other times you are out of luck. Usually if you have a lot of ink and stuff like that down, or fabric or something, you can pull it up and readjust it, but other times not so much. So I'm just going to decide whether, oh, I think that looks so much more interesting already just by having that extra pattern underneath. And because I had that little border on there, it's just enough to help it stand out. So I am going to use a little liquid glue for that. I'm going to put a foam square underneath the top of this leaf because otherwise it's going to be unsupported and it will get crushed. But these other guys, I think are supported enough. Actually, it doesn't really matter what shape you die cut. You could just, use any old shape cutter because you can't really see the shape of it too much now that we've got this other stuff glued on top. Doesn't take too much of that glue. This stuff is like cold hot glue. I like it because it marries so quickly and so well. It's I probably could have used that for that ribbon and it wouldn't have seeped through, so that's kind of nice. I've had these labels for a long time, so hopefully they still have sticky left on them. I'm trying to use up some older stash that I'd forgotten about. And we always need thank you cards and thinking of you cards and stuff. So this is a thank you card. Oh yeah, it's still nice and sticky. And I'm just going to put that right centered up on there. Just be careful, because if you're doing this right away like I am, your glue is still going to be wet. And there you have it, a lovely thank you card. We did a lot of fun techniques. They might not be new to you, but maybe you haven't done these techniques in a while and you like to try doing the inky resist and try layering up some stamping, and have fun with your supplies, use them, that's why you bought them, and go make some beautiful cards. Please give me a thumbs up before you go. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and don't forget to check out our sponsor, Rubber Stamp Tapestry. You can find them online at pegstamps.com, and I will have all the supplies I used listed below. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.